Today I want to share with you the 7 mistakes of food storage that we all need to avoid. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nutrient-dense foods like bone broth, ferment, sourdough, and more. So if you enjoy learning how to be a modern pioneer in the kitchen, consider subscribing to my channel. And don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. Well, before we get started, I just want to let you know that if any time you want to jump ahead, I'll be sure to have the timestamps in the description and in the pinned comment covering everything that I'm going to talk about. Well, I recently came across this article in the Backwoods Home magazine called 7 Mistakes of Food Storage, and it really piqued my interest, and so I wanted to share it with all of you. Now, the magazine article was written by a gal named Vicki Tate, and some of you may be familiar with her because she's also the author of this book. It's called Cookin' with the little apostrophe, it's cute, Cookin' with Home Storage. And this is a really great cookbook for anyone who has a well-stocked working pantry and or an extended or prepper pantry. She really goes through all the ways to use non-perishable foods that you're probably stocking in one or both of those pantries. Now this is an older book, but if I can find it online, I'll put a link to it. But certainly you can go ahead and look at maybe like at Amazon or Thrift Books, some of those places that do sell used books, because my copy, as a matter of fact, is used. And so keep your eyes open for that. But Vicki Tate is a very knowledgeable person when it comes to food storage as well as cooking with food storage. Now, as I mentioned, this article came from the Backwoods Home magazine. And I don't know if you're familiar with that magazine or not, but if you enjoy living a prepared lifestyle, prepper as they say, you might really enjoy that magazine. I subscribe to it and I really like it. It's perfect really no matter where you live, whether you're actually on a homestead or in the suburbs or in a city. I think it's a lot of fun to read, and it has a lot of helpful information just on the generalities of how to be prepared and prepare your home and what you may have best that you can. And if you're dreaming of maybe having a homestead one day, a little larger one maybe than where you're living now, if you're in the suburbs or the city, I think that this magazine is a lot of fun to just kind of dream of, to read this and dream about those things for the future. Now, in this particular issue, and I want to mention that, yes, I subscribe to this magazine, but sometimes I actually find these at used bookstores for just like $1, and sometimes even less. So definitely keep your eyes open. As a matter of fact, this copy's from 2019 that I must have come across in a used bookstore. But this particular, the subtitle of Backwoods Home magazine is Practical Ideas for Self-Reliant Living. And I think that's nice, because I think after everything that we've been through these last couple of years, I think so many of us want to be self-reliant or start a self-reliant lifestyle or be more self-reliant than we've been in the past. But for example, some of the articles in this one are getting started with ham radio. I know some folks have been talking about that online, and I find that very interesting. I don't know a lot about it, but I find it interesting. And then there's thrifty old world soups. I think that's what attracted me to this particular copy. And then the basics of root cellaring. That's my dream one day, to have a root cellar. And then sharpening old tools and hunting grouse. And then advice from second-time homesteaders. And they always have the cutest artwork. So definitely look for that. I'll link to Backwoods Homes magazine in the description underneath this video. But also, and I believe this is also put out by them, this is called Self-Reliance. And again, just the cutest artwork. But this is a very interesting magazine too, especially, as I said, if living a self-reliant self-reliant life is new to you, I think you'll really enjoy this. But if you are already relatively self-reliant, but you want to become even more self-reliant, this magazine is very good as well. And this particular issue, this is one that I was subscribed and it came to me this summer of 2022. And they have Heart Smart Greek Cuisine, and there's some very nice Greek recipes in here. And then Foraging for Berries. I always love articles about foraging. And then 11 building mistakes. So if you're building your homestead, this may be able to help. And then tips on watering your garden, which I really need help with that. We really can't do much watering right now, but come fall, hopefully we'll get a little more, maybe we'll get some rain and we'll be able to maybe water a little more. So that article was very interesting to me as well. So that's that for that particular publisher. But while we're on the subject of magazines, see, some people get like, what was popular when we were teenagers, like Glamour magazine and stuff. Now I'm getting Backwoods Home magazine, Self-Reliance, and Mother Earth News. This is a terrific magazine. It's a little more fancy than the Backwoods and the Self-Reliance, but they always have terrific information in here. And again, I have found these at used bookstores, both locally here in Austin and when my husband and I have traveled around, like up to Arizona. For those of you who live in Arizona, you have the Bookman's bookstore that we always enjoy stopping at. And I found some copies there. And this was a great issue. This was actually from their April-May issue of this year, and it was Plant a Lush Garden, work with nature to increase yield. So that, I found that very interesting. And then save money on soil amendments, make compost in small spaces, and that's exactly what I do. I make compost in a very small space. And then turn a profit with a non-traditional farm plan. So that may be interesting if you have a little farm. Then they had some other articles, Wildcrafted Basketry, identifying and prevent hive disease. That's interesting. My husband's cousin raises bees. And chive and oregano as medicinal herbs. I always enjoy that. I have a lot of videos on medicinal herbs. I'll be sure to link to those. I think you'll find it interesting if that's something that's new to you, about growing them and how to use them and all of that. And then install a neighborly little free seed library. How cute is that? Well, in any event. Alrighty, well, let's go over the 7 mistakes of food storage that we all want to avoid. Well, the first thing that Vicki lays out in her article is that most of us don't have enough variety in our food storage. And I found that very interesting, and it really got me thinking. Something that I've never really thought about, but she makes such a good point here. And she says that if, for whatever reason, whatever might happen in the world, and you really had to rely on your food storage and did not have the ability to go to the grocery store, or maybe your garden was very limited, or whatever the case may be, that whatever you have in your food storage that you eat day in and that you would have to eat day in and day out, that you may actually find that you're allergic to it. I never thought about this. And she said sometimes if you eat things periodically, you may not even notice that you have an allergy. But if you eat it day in and day out, then you may develop an allergy to it. And I thought that was fascinating. And I remember reading this. I don't know if it was specifically in the book Nourishing Traditions or if it was an article on the Weston A. Price Foundation website that may have been written by Sally Fallon, also the author of the book Nourishing Traditions. And she talked about that too. I believe that if you eat the same thing over and over and over again, you can actually sometimes develop an intolerance to it. And I thought that was fascinating, but I kind of had forgot about that. So I thought that making sure that we have some variety is important. And she's specifically talking about people who maybe are stocking wheat. And she's talking about the modern day wheat berry, for example. And you may have a manual grain grinder and you're making bread with that, hopefully sourdough, or whatever the case may be. But it's very important to maybe have a variety of grains. And that's something that I really like to do. I like to keep, I don't tend to keep too much of the traditional hard red wheat. I do have some white wheat. I also like to keep einkorn and spelt and rye. I tend to like to lean a little more to the ancient grains and the sort of like tried and true, so to speak. But I think that this is an excellent point. We need to make sure that we have variety, that we're stocking maybe different types of grains, different types of beans, different varieties of rice, maybe basmati and jasmine, things like that. And as well as a variety of whatever packaged foods we keep on in our extended pantry, our prepper pantry, as well as whatever we're keeping in our working pantry. So I think that that's very important, that we always focus on having variety. Also, in her number 1 on variety, she does also include making sure that you have a variety of spices on hand. And I think that's an herb, dried herbs and spices, so that you can vary the flavors of whatever you're serving. And I think that that's always good advice. Now, number 2, she calls extended staples. And I think we have definitely talked about this in the past. And I've even made a video about this that I referred to as multiple streams of food. And what she means by the term extended staples is that you have variety in the type of food that you store. So for example, if you keep dried beans, also have canned beans. She uses the common expression, never put all your eggs in one basket. And that is so true. She says you may have your home dehydrated foods, you may have your home canned foods, but you also want to have canned foods from the grocery store. And she also covers in this section something that I just made a video on. I think it was maybe 2 videos ago, and I'll be sure to link to it, where I talked about the 12 items, the 12 food items that you never want to run out of. You always want to make sure that you have them in your working pantry and at least one backup in your extended pantry. And some of the things she's talking about are some of the things that I covered in that video. Cooking oil, baking powder, baking soda, yeast. She also here includes powdered eggs. Sometimes certain powdered foods I don't consider like super essential. You can certainly, I've shared with you how to make pantry breads and I'll be sure to link to that if that's something that interests you, when you don't have fresh eggs. And I tend to not keep powdered eggs. I always worry a little about some of these powdered foods. Maybe if you have a dehydrator, or not a dehydrator, even maybe a dehydrator, I'm not really sure because I've never dehydrated eggs, but if you have a freeze dryer and you can freeze dry eggs, and it doesn't damage the protein in the eggs, that may be something to think about. But generally I worry about these powdered egg products. What temperature were they dried at? Might the proteins be damaged? Might the fat in the egg yolk be damaged? And so on and so forth. So that is something that always concerns me a little. However, I think that there are definitely some things that you never want to run out of. And there are always things that you want to make sure you have multiple streams. Have your home canned, your home dehydrated, your home freeze-dried if you have that, as well as things that you've purchased at your grocery store that are similar to the things you make homemade. We can make so much stuff homemade. And I have so many videos for you that I've shared with you on how to make all kinds of things homemade. But it's always important to have those backups that you have purchased from the store, because what if, like this summer, I basically have had no garden. There's not going to be much home canned food, and so I'm going to have to rely on other options that I have, dried foods as well as canned goods that I've bought at the grocery store. So always be thinking of that. She calls it extended staples. I kind of call it multiple streams of food, as well as things you never want to run out of. So the bottom line is just make sure that you have some type of backups to anything that you're making homemade in the event that you run out of your homemade items, or you simply don't have the opportunity to make your homemade items, don't just rely on what you make homemade. Always have your store-bought backups. Number 3 that she talks about is that a lot of people will forget to stock vitamins. They feel that they have a very good and varied diet, a very nutritious diet, but they won't stock vitamins. And I can understand this to a certain extent, because if you don't take vitamins, they definitely don't have extended shelf lives. They do start to degrade in their ability to provide vitamins to you. So it's often not something that people will readily think about stocking. However, if you are eating basically foods that are relatively similar and that you're eating that day in and day out, and you simply may not have options for certain foods that contain vitamins that we need because our body doesn't make them naturally, then yes, we want to remember to have some type of vitamins in our working pantry or our extended pantry. Now, for all of that, I have a caveat. I'm not a fan of most vitamins. I think it's always best, like commercially made vitamins. I think if we're going to have vitamins, it's best to stock those that are made from real foods. I think those whole food type vitamins are better than ones where just some nutrient is extracted and sold just as an individual nutrient, because the nutrients in our foods all work, synergistically. They all work together. And so I'm not a fan of just extracting out vitamin C, because what about the bioflavonoids and how do you pronounce rutin, R-U-T-I-N? You always see that in conjunction with the vitamins that are in vitamin C rich foods. And so I think that if you can buy vitamins that are made from whole foods, then, and not the store, but real foods, all the better. And if you want some information on whole food vitamins, I have a video called, I think it's like Stocking Superfoods, in your pantry. And it's those superfoods that are real foods that are wonderful to keep and can provide us vitamins. And there's sometimes just different fruits that have been dehydrated and put into capsules, and they're just naturally very rich in a particular vitamin. There are a number of fruits like that that are very rich in vitamin C, and they are sold in a dehydrated capsule form. And I think that's much better than buying a vitamin C. So look for those vitamins where whole foods have simply been dehydrated for you and then put into a capsule. And speaking of that, you have definitely, if this is something that interests you and these are the type of vitamins that you want to buy, definitely check out Heidi over at Rain Country Homestead, because I know that she has videos where she has taken different foods that she's dehydrated and then ground them up, and then she'll buy like the little gelatin capsules and actually make her own. So that is a very interesting idea and something that's certainly worth looking into and could probably be a lot more cost effective than anything we can buy. Number 4 is very interesting, and this I think is really true. I think it's easy to forget because we're focused on making sure that we have all the real foods we need to make nutritious meals and so on and so forth. But she talks about how a lot of us can easily forget quick and easy, what she calls psychological foods. And these are basically foods that, like she talks about goodies. And she lists Jell-O, pudding, candy, and so on and so forth. And she said it may sound frivolous, but through the years, she's talked with many people who have lived entirely on their storage for extended periods of time. Nearly all of them say these were the most helpful items in their storage to normalize their situation and make it more bearable. And these are especially important, and yes, I would definitely echo this. I think the that having those little treat foods are especially important if you have children. Because I think that if you ever do need to live under stressful conditions or stressful situations, having a little sweet treat for them can be very encouraging, very comforting, and very, as they mention, as Vicki mentions in her article, very normalizing. Now, in addition to the treats, she also talks about just making sure that, because it is easy for us to forget this, to have no cook foods on hand. It could be as simple as a jar of peanut butter and some crackers and some jam, things like that. Things that don't require any preparation, which are especially helpful in situations where you may have no power. And I really believe having these types of foods, and even, the no cook definitely applies to not having power. But I think it's also important to have foods that are very convenient and easy to prepare. Because what if the weather's really bad and you're stuck in the home, and with it being bad weather, with it being winter, with it being cold, and maybe you're sick, maybe you have a bad cold and you don't really feel like doing a lot of cooking, or maybe you're even really quite under the weather and you're in bed and other family members have to rely on preparing food, and maybe family members who don't have maybe the same culinary skills as you, being able to open a can of soup or make some macaroni and cheese, from the box. And yes, I know these are not nutritious, because I always get the comments, Mary, you're always talking about nourishing traditions. How can you say get macaroni and cheese in a box? But I think sometimes those foods can really help save the day if you're in a difficult situation and you're quite ill. I definitely found that the case to be last December, when I was sick for about a week or two, and my husband and our son was also home with us, and they were kind of having to fend for themselves. And thank God my husband, he's a pretty good scrambled egg maker and toast and butter. But it was really nice to be able to have some canned soups that they could open and also serve me. When you're under the weather, having a cup of hot soup is really delightful. And yes, I've showed you in the past, I do keep a couple of boxes of macaroni and cheese on hand. I try to find like the Annie's brand that's organic and whatnot to just sort of ease my conscience. But I definitely think that having those quick and easy foods, and then having some fun foods, like things that I like to keep on hand are cinnamon graham crackers. They're my son's favorite. My husband enjoys them too. Some chocolates, that's my guilty pleasure. I enjoyed chocolate. And just a few little things like that. It's amazing what a difference it can make. And this may sound funny to you, but even just having a box of saltines in your pantry can really be delightful. And something my husband and I, we were laughing about, we were reminiscing about the other night about the very unusual, once every 100-year winter storm that we had here in Central Texas back in 2021. And I have to tell you, we had power was extremely intermittent. Most of the time we didn't have power. And we would just sit here by the fireplace with our jackets on because it was getting so cold in the house, and we couldn't go out. I mean, we got like a lot of ice and then snow on top of the ice, so there was no driving and everything was closed, But it was so funny because we were reminiscing about how much we enjoyed the saltine crackers and the peanut butter that we had. So you never know. Number 5, she's labeled this balance. And boy, did I feel that this was a good point. It's a very easy mistake to make, and I have even gotten into this myself. She talks about how you can get into I don't know if you call it a rut or just a pattern of focusing on stocking up one thing when your budget allows. So you have an extra $10 or $20 and then you say, okay, I'm going to buy flour or a whole grain. And then you find, gee, maybe some emergency presents itself and you got a lot of whole grain or a lot of flour, but you don't have a lot of anything else. So she talks about how to have balance when you shop. Buy some whole grain, buy some beans, buy some rice, buy some things at the grocery store for your multiple streams of food, or what did she call it? The extended staples. So buy kind of a little bit of everything every time you shop, so you don't get into a situation where you just have a lot of one thing but nothing else. Yeah, she talks about buying several items rather than a large quantity of one item. And that can be, we've talked about, sometimes if you do have the benefit of being able to go in and with friends who like to stock similar foods that you do, and you can all go in together and maybe buy a 50-pound bag of something and then divide it up accordingly, that's great. But a lot of people don't have that type of social circle. So this balance actually will serve you very well, because you can buy, I just did an Aldi's haul the other day that I shared with all of you, and I showed how they still have some really good bargains, some really good prices. I shared with you 7 foods that were all under $1, and then a whole bunch of other foods that were all under $2. And you can still buy a 2 to 4 pound, depending what variety, but a 2 to 4 pound bag of beans. The rice was an exceptionally good buy. It was a 10-pound bag, and it was about $5. And so say you had $20, you could buy that rice. You could buy the beans, as I said, ranged from like 2 to 4 pounds, and the prices ranged accordingly, but still just a couple of dollars. So you're building that variety, so you don't have all of one thing and then the snowstorm hits and you have nothing else. Number 6 is an excellent reminder, and I'm confident that this is a mistake that all of us have made at one time or another. I know I definitely have, and it's not storing our bulk foods correctly. Now, I have really learned over the years how to store food correctly, and I have a whole playlist all about that, and I'll be sure to link to it. If I run out of room in the iCards, I'll definitely put that in the description and in the pinned comment. And I go over all the different options for storing food, and including the unusual things like the Mylar bags, and how to use oxygen absorbers, and how to use silica gel packs, when and when to not use these things. And so that is really important, and I have really learned a lot. And she talks about how you want to make sure you have the correct containers for the correct food, and you want to make sure your food is thoroughly protected from moisture, insects, and rodents. And that's not always the easiest thing in the world to do. She outlines, and these are just kind of little brief paragraphs, but she outlines about how important it is to make sure that you have very heavy duty type containers, like the big 5-gallon bucket containers, and that you make sure they're food safe, or you at least line them with something that's food safe. And she shares a lot of tips, which this is something that I never really thought about. I don't do this, but I think that this is something that's very important to share. And she talks about how not to line your buckets. I usually use food-safe buckets, but if we were not using food-safe buckets, she makes a very good point to say, don't line them with trash can liners. And I haven't done that, but I would never have thought about it. I think that if maybe I had something that wasn't food safe, I might have done that thinking it was clean. Well, yes, it's clean, but she's saying here in this article that they're treated with pesticides, which would make sense since you're putting garbage in them, and you want to discourage rodents and insects and so on and so forth from being attracted to it. So maybe they are in fact treated with pesticides. I thought that was a very interesting comment that she made. Also something, now we are not prone to this here in Central Texas, but if you live in an area where you may get earthquakes, she talks about not storing your buckets too high. Number one, they could fall and potentially hurt you, but she talks about how they can fall and the lids can pop off. And then obviously the food, is all over the place and potentially unusable at that point. So that I thought that was a very good option, but very good information. But she also mentions another reason as to why you don't want to stack them too high is in the event that with all of the weight, that could they be susceptible to cracking. And that's something I hadn't thought about either. I don't tend to stack mine more than 3 high, so I think I'm okay with that. But I'm definitely, it's funny because I used to stack them 4 high, and I just got to thinking, I wasn't just thinking about cracking. I'm not really even quite sure what I was thinking about just looking at it. I was thinking, oh, maybe that's too high. And so maybe I was thinking about them toppling or something. But those are 2 good reasons. If you use those big 5-gallon buckets, which I really like, and I use the Gamma lid, so it's easy for me to get the lid on and off. If you have the regular lid, you can still get those off easily. You just need that special little tool that can make it easy to remove it. So that's something, and you always want to keep that with your buckets, because you don't want to be in a situation where you can't get into the bucket, because without that tool, I find almost impossible to get those lids off. She also talks about something that she personally likes are the number 10 tin cans. And I've never used those, but I know that a lot of different companies sell food in them for long-term storage. And I even saw someone, I think it was here on YouTube maybe, who had a machine just a manual type machine, and they had the cans and they had the lids, and they would put their food, whatever they were putting in there, say rice, for example, or something, grain, I'm not sure what they were putting in there, and then they put the lid on top, and the machine kind of just looked like a vise, sort of, and the man put the can, the number 10 can, on the base of this device, and then put the lid on, and then he just pulled the lever down, and it somehow sealed the can. That's fascinating to me. I'll see if I can find that video. It's a while ago when I saw that, but definitely something worth keeping in mind. Now, number 7, and I don't think this is going to surprise anybody, but I think, I know I'm raising my hand. I have been guilty of this, and that is forgetting to use my food storage. I really try to do first in, first out, best that I can, but sometimes I have actually forgotten about things and I've not used my food storage. And then it's like way past its best used by date. I don't worry too much about the best used by date, but some things just do go stale or take on and off flavor. And she is saying that this is the biggest problem that she has seen amongst people who have an extended or prepper pantry. She shares how important it is that you know what you're stocking, it's food that you're willing to eat, and that you know how to prepare it. Something I want to share with you, and maybe some of you have found yourselves in a similar situation, but ever since the pandemic, I have found that both my working pantry and my extended pantry have become a little discombobulated. I also keep, to a certain extent, some extended pantry or prepper pantry items in my working pantry. And things have kind of gotten mixed up a little. I've not always been perfect about first in, first out. And so what I'm going to do is I am going to completely rehaul my pantry, my working pantry. That's where I'm going to start. I'm going to take everything out and I'm going to reorganize everything. And because I've really been inspired by my girlfriend Robin, I think many of you know Robin. She has the YouTube channel Faith and Flour. she's amazing at organizing and cleaning. Also, she and her husband bought an older home and they renovated it, and it's very fun to follow along on that journey. But she's excellent at organizing, and I've learned so much from her. And so I am just going to I'm not going to overwhelm myself and take everything out. I eventually will take everything out, but I'm going to do one shelf at a time. And I was thinking I'll take you along with me when I do that, and I'll film that if that might help some of you as to kind of start thinking about how you want to organize things in your working pantry. If, like me, you just find that it's just gotten a little out of control. I think what happened was that, for the first few months of the pandemic, we didn't leave the house. And I was doing great. I had plenty of food, in both my working and my extended pantry, and we were doing well. But then as the months went by, and then we eventually felt more comfortable about leaving our home and going to the grocery store, it was good timing because I really was starting to run low on my supplies, and said, well, this is a good time to kind of start restocking. And, just buying each time we would go. We generally shop weekly. So each time we would go, I'd get an extra 5 cans of this. You always hear, about that, get 5 cans at a time. Or, I might check the clearance aisle and they'd have some, good buy on pasta or whatever the case may be. And I started restocking. But as kind of life got back to normal and we weren't really home anymore, as much at home as we were during the pandemic, I found that I didn't have the time now to be as organized as I had been earlier. And things were just kind of starting to pile up and get a little messy and discombobulated. So I definitely want to take you along for that. And we'll just clean out my pantry together. I'm going to kind of not make myself crazy. I'll do one shelf at a time, but I'll put it all together in one video for you. And hopefully that can help some of you. It's going to be very real world. Now, there is one thing that I want to say about that. We're going to talk about, using what we have in our storage, definitely. But one thing I want to talk about is you often do hear a lot of, only stock what you eat. And I totally understand that. It makes sense. However, I do think that it's important to experiment with foods that are new to you, but to experiment with them in the present. Don't just buy them and stock them. Try them first. And I think that's important given the present state of our economy, given the high inflation we're living through, number one, and which affects the cost of our groceries, and also the fact that we have supply chain problems as well. So what we like may not always be available, and what we like may not always be affordable. And so I think that it is very important that you buy different foods, try preparing them, see what you think of them, and give them a few tries, and try some different preparations. And then if you like them, then that's something that you can start stocking. And basically, this is what she's talking about, is that you want to be very familiar with the foods that you stock. You want to know how to prepare them, because if for any reason the situation you're in is stressful, you don't want to have to really think too hard about how to make these foods. You don't want to suddenly see dried beans in front of you and wonder, okay, what do I do with this now? And so I made I guess a little bit of a funny video. It was a couple of months, after the pandemic had started and whatnot, and I was getting a lot of emails and questions. Geez, I've bought all these dried beans. What do I do with them? And I thought that was very cute. And I really like this statement that Vicki makes in her article. She says, a stressful period is not a good time to totally change your diet. That's very true. Get a good food storage cookbook and learn to use the foods you store. It's better to find out the mistakes you'll make now, implying, cooking these different things, while there's still time to make corrections. And then she goes on, she, wraps up the article where she talks about the types of things that the pioneers stored. And it really wasn't all that different than those of us who have extended pantries. It wasn't very different than what we store. But just like she encourages us to have little bits of variety, they had little bits of variety. And it was being able to take those basic things, but with those little bits of variety brought in, to make nutritious and delicious meals that help them persevere and to survive. And I think that's the bottom line when it comes to what we keep in our working pantry, as well as what we keep in our extended or prepper pantry, that we have the basic building blocks for how to make nutritious and delicious meals that our families, ourselves, our friends, whomever we may be feeding, are familiar with and do find them tasty and satisfying and also comforting. So I hope that all of us have really taken a lot away from this and will learn, hopefully, never to make these 7 mistakes again. We'll avoid them and just persevere on building up our working pantry, building up our prepper pantry with all of the things we need, using them, eating them, and being prepared when maybe that's what we primarily have to rely on. Well, if you'd like more information about how to stock your prepper pantry, how to do it on as little as $5 a week, and most important, as we learned here, how to store everything correctly, be sure to click on this video over here where I have a playlist that covers all of that and more, as well as lots of recipes for how to use and cook with non-perishable foods. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless.